All right, let's dive into something I think we can all relate to at some point, especially anyone who's traveled to the U.S.
Oh, yeah.
Tipping, right?
It's a whole thing.
It can be like really confusing to figure out who to tip, how much, when to even do it.
Definitely a source of anxiety for a lot of people. I mean, it's a unique system for sure.
Yeah, and we want to like make sure everyone listening feels confident so they can just enjoy their experience, right?
Absolutely. No awkward moments, just smooth sailing.
So today's deep dive is actually coming from a Reddit thread that asked a pretty straightforward question. What happens if you just don't tip?
Yeah, what happens then? I'm curious.
Like, what are the consequences?
Right.
And the responses were, well, pretty interesting. I mean, they range from like subtle social cues to full-blown confrontations.
Oh, wow. Like what kind of confrontations are we talking about?
Well, there's actually a story about a British man at a bar got into a physical altercation with someone who didn't tip.
Oh my gosh, seriously.
Yeah, like punched him in the nose.
Wow. That's a bit extreme, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. But I think even if you look past those really intense examples, there's a definite theme of judgment, right?
Yeah.
Like servers remembering faces,
Yeah.
talking amongst themselves, even developing stereotypes about tourists from certain countries.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's interesting, though, because a lot of that judgment, I think, comes from a really real economic reality, right?
Yeah, for a lot of service workers in the US, especially in some states, the minimum wage for tipped workers is significantly lower than the regular minimum wage.
Right. So they really rely on those tips to make ends meet.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes just to reach the basic minimum.
It's like a hidden cost almost built into the whole system. You
Yeah.
see a price on the menu, but there's this unsaid expectation that you're going to pay more to ensure that the person serving you actually earns a livable wage.
Yeah.
And this brings up a really important question. Should the customer be responsible for ensuring a living wage?
Yeah.
It's an ethical dilemma a lot of travelers really wrestle with, you know? On one hand, you have your own personal beliefs about fair compensation.
Right.
On the other hand, you're in a country with a very specific cultural norm, and not participating can have really real consequences for the people serving you.
Absolutely. And the source material, you really see both sides of this.
Yeah.
People who are frustrated with the system, but then also acknowledging the very real impact it has on the workers.
Oh, for sure.
And I think a lot of people don't even realize there's this concept of tipping out that a lot of servers have to do.
Oh, right.
Like
Yeah.
they have to tip out a percentage of their sales to other staff, like the bartenders, the bussers, you know.
So if you think about it, a server has to tip out, let's say, 20% of their sales. They serve a $100 table, no tip. They've actually lost money.
Yeah, they're actually paying to work that table.
It's crazy.
And then, you know, there are situations that show just how messy this whole tipping-centric environment can get.
Oh, yeah, like what?
There are stories in the source material about waitresses following people out to the parking lot to demand tips.
Really?
Yeah, and even managers getting caught adding extra tip amounts onto credit card receipts.
Oh, wow. That's not good.
You know, I think it's a reminder that systems designed to kind of incentivize good service, they can be exploited.
Yeah, definitely.
And that just makes things even more confusing, I think, for both the customer and the worker.
Absolutely.
So, okay, we've seen what can happen if you don't tip, but like, what about the people who are trying to do it right? What should they know?
Right, right.
What are the do's and don'ts? Luckily, the Reddit thread had some pretty good advice, so
Oh, good.
like, where do you even start?
Well, I think it's helpful to think about it in terms of where tipping is, like, essential. So
So,
sit-down restaurants for sure,
Yep.
bars, taxis, those are like the big three.
okay, the trifecta.
Yeah. And in those situations, 15 to 20% is pretty standard. More if the service was exceptional.
Okay, so what about those places where it's not quite as expected, but still appreciated,
Right.
like fast food
Yeah, fast food.
or like counter service,
Yeah.
takeout?
Yeah, that's where things get a little fuzzier. Like,
Yeah.
it's not as ingrained. But a lot of people still do tip, especially if, they liked the service.
Right.
Or just to acknowledge the effort, I guess.
Yeah. Okay, and then what about that whole tip on the device thing?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like that can be so awkward, you know?
It
It's
is.
like you're paying with your card and all of a sudden, boop, there's the screen asking for a tip right in front of the cashier.
Right there. Yeah.
It can be like high pressure.
It is. And it's interesting, though, like how that kind of technological change has actually impacted, like, people's tipping habits.
Hmm.
Studies have shown that people tend to tip more when they're prompted on a device.
Oh, really?
Maybe it's the social pressure, or maybe it's just, hitting a button. Who knows?
Yeah. It's like, You don't want to be that person who hits no tip while the cashier's staring you
No,
down.
no, no, no.
But the Reddit thread had some good tactical advice.
Oh, good.
Swift hands, they said.
Okay.
Just hit that no tip button quickly.
Okay.
Or like customize the amount while you're handing the device back.
Oh, that's smart. Yeah.
Less awkward for everyone.
Less awkward. Yeah.
Of course, even with all these guidelines, I think tipping can still be pretty subjective.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, what one person considers good service, another person's like, whatever.
Right.
And that subjectivity, I think, is where things can get kind of, well, interesting.
Oh, yeah.
Like, there's a story in the source material about a manager who chased a customer out of the restaurant because they didn't tip.
Seriously.
The customer's mom apparently felt like the service was too slow.
Oh, wow.
But the manager saw it as like a violation of the unspoken tipping code.
I mean, yeah, he took it personally.
Big time.
But on the flip side, though, there are also stories about kindness and generosity, like actually being remembered, which I thought was really nice.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Like, there was this anecdote about a UPS driver who went above and beyond to apologize for a damaged package.
Oh, wow.
But the reason he did that was because he remembered the customer's good tipping habits from, like, years ago when he worked at a pizza place.
It's like karma, almost.
Which is,
It really shows, our actions, even something as small as tipping, can, like, have this ripple effect
Right.
and really shape our interactions with other people.
Absolutely. And I think they really demonstrate the human element of this whole system.
Yeah.
Like, tipping, even though it has its flaws, can be an opportunity to connect with people, acknowledge them, express gratitude, recognize their effort.
So amidst all the debate, all the complexity around tipping, there's this reminder that even in a system that people criticize for being so transactional, small acts of kindness can make a difference.
They really can.
I mean, it's clear that there's just so much to consider when it comes to tipping, right? Like cultural expectations, the economic realities,
Yeah.
even like the psychology of it all. How do we even perceive good service,
Yeah, it's so multifaceted.
Yeah.
And you see that reflected in, all the debate about whether tipping should even exist in the U.S.
Right.
Because some people argue it puts too much pressure on customers.
Yeah.
And that it, creates income inequality for workers.
Right.
And then, of course, others think it encourages that personalized service. They think it makes workers want to go above and beyond.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier that tipping actually started in Europe, but it evolved very differently here in the U.S.
Yeah.
Did the source material mention any like alternative systems, any other ways of doing it?
Yeah, actually, several people brought up places like Japan, Australia, where tipping is just not a thing.
Interesting.
Workers are paid a living wage, and the price you see is the price you pay. And actually, some people even argued that those systems lead to better service overall,
Oh, interesting.
because it kind of eliminates that weird power imbalance between, the person tipping and the person being tipped.
So it challenges that assumption that tipping is the only way to get good service.
Exactly. And then, it makes you wonder, if other developed countries can make it work without tipping,
Yeah.
why is the U.S. so attached to it?
It really does seem like there are some really strong opinions on both sides.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we saw that in our deep dive today.
Yeah.
Some people think it's just part of American culture. You're visiting, you got to adapt.
Right.
Others think the system's broken. It needs a complete overhaul.
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that's going to keep going for a while.
Definitely.
But honestly, no matter how you feel about it, if you're planning a visit, it's important to understand how tipping works here.
Absolutely. And I think that's what we wanted to do with this deep dive,
Sure.
just kind of unpack this really fascinating and sometimes confusing topic.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I guess I'm left wondering, maybe it's not about finding a perfect solution.
Right.
Maybe it's just about being aware, being empathetic.
I think that's a great point. Like, recognizing that tipping's not just a transaction.
Yeah.
It's a human interaction.
Yeah,
And it can really affect the lives of the people serving us.
absolutely. So whether you tip generously or you're someone who thinks the system needs to change, just be informed, be thoughtful, be respectful.
Could have said it better myself.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into U.S. tipping culture. Hopefully you're feeling a little more prepared, a little less anxious about navigating this very unique system.
Yeah, and maybe you even have some new food for thought.
Absolutely. Maybe you'll even spark some interesting conversations of your own. Until next time, may all your tipping experiences be smooth, generous, and completely awkwardness-free.
Yes, to that.